Why the U.S. military operation in Venezuela could lower your gas prices or spark higher energy costs. That's the explosive headline dominating global news feeds right now, and if you're like most Americans staring at the pump or dreading your next utility bill, this story hits home in ways that go beyond politics. On January 3, 2026, U.S. Special Forces executed Operation Absolute Resolve, a lightning-fast raid that captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, whisking them off to New York for trial on narco-terrorism charges. President Trump didn't mince words in his address, declaring the U.S. would take charge of Venezuela temporarily, with American oil giants like Chevron and ExxonMobil stepping in to overhaul its dilapidated petroleum sector. But here's the burning question that's keeping energy traders up at night. Will this influx of Venezuelan crude flood the market, driving down prices and giving your wallet a break? Or will the chaos of intervention trigger supply shocks that send costs skyrocketing? As I ponder this from my own perspective, having watched similar geopolitical gambles unfold over the years, it feels like a high-stakes poker game where the house, global markets, could either pay out big or leave everyone busted. We're about to dissect the layers of this drama, from the raw facts on the ground to the ripple effects worldwide, because understanding this isn't just about oil. It's about how one bold move could redefine energy security for generations. Stick with me for a no-holds-barred breakdown that cuts through the hype. Diving into the context, Venezuela's story is a tragic tale of riches turned to rags, a cautionary epic that blends resource wealth with political turmoil in ways that feel almost Shakespearean. This nation boasts the planet's largest proven oil reserves at a staggering 303 billion barrels, outpacing even Saudi Arabia's 267 billion. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration's 2025 bulletin. Yet under Maduro's rule since 2013, production has plummeted from historic highs of 3.5 million barrels per day in the late 1990s to a current trickle of around 900,000 to 1.1 million barrels daily, as reported in recent data from Trading Economics and the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Blame a toxic mix, chronic mismanagement by state-run PDVSA, rampant corruption that siphoned billions, and layered U.S. sanctions starting in 2015 under Obama, escalating under Trump in 2019, which barred American firms from dealing with Venezuelan oil and crippled exports. Maduro, indicted back in 2020 for allegedly flooding the U.S. with cocaine via the Cartel of the Suns, leaned on allies like Russia and China for survival. Beijing alone holds $19 billion in oil-backed loans, absorbing over 60% of Venezuela's exports. January raid unfolded amid escalating tensions. U.S. warships patrolled the Caribbean for months. Intelligence pinpointed Maduro's location at Fort Tuna, and a pre-dawn assault neutralized air defenses with over 150 aircraft, allowing Delta Force to snatch him without major casualties. Trump framed it as a counter-narcotics win, but whispers of oil motives echo loudly, especially as he vowed U.S. companies would invest billions to make Venezuela's oil flow again. From a human angle, it's heartbreaking. Millions have fled hyperinflation and shortages, turning a once prosperous land into a humanitarian crisis, all while its black gold sits untapped beneath the surface. Shifting to the analysis, let's unpack how this operation might genuinely slash gas prices, but only if the stars align in a way that history rarely allows. Venezuela's heavy, sour crude is tailor-made for U.S. Gulf refineries, which process it into diesel and gasoline efficiently. Think of it as the perfect puzzle piece for America's energy needs. With U.S. firms now potentially at the helm, analysts from J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs project a production bump to 1.31 per million barrels per day within 2 years, assuming stability holds. That's no small feat. Chevron, already licensed there, could scale up by 200,000 400,000 barrels daily with targeted investments in the Orinoco Belt, where extra-heavy oil awaits extraction. Current global benchmarks like Brent at $60 per barrel and WTI under $58 could dip further to sub-$50 if this supply hits the market, easing U.S. inflation that's lingered at 3% and making everything from summer road trips to freight shipping cheaper. Geopolitically, it undercuts OPEC+ influence, starving revenue from adversaries like Russia, whose war machine in Ukraine depends on high oil prices. Imagine weakening Putin's grip without firing a shot. But as I reflect on this, it reminds me of those optimistic post-Cold War dreams. The upside feels tantalizing, yet it's fragile, hinging on avoiding the pitfalls that have doomed similar ventures. From my viewpoint, this could be a masterstroke for energy independence, but only if Trump navigates the human element, local workers, communities scarred by years of neglect with more than just corporate muscle. Yet the flip side looms large, with risks that could ignite energy costs in ways that hit everyday folks hardest, turning a calculated strike into a wildfire. Immediate disruptions are already evident. The raid caused widespread blackouts and halted operations at key facilities like the Jose refinery, potentially slicing 500,000 barrels from daily output in the short term, per Brookings Institution estimates. Venezuela's heavy crude makes up a niche but critical slice of global supply, less than 1%, but irreplaceable for certain refineries, leading to premiums that could add 10–15 cents per gallon to U.S. diesel prices if alternatives from Canada or the Middle East get bid up. Then there's the backlash. China, furious over lost loans and exports, might retaliate by flooding markets with discounted crude or boycotting U.S. LNG, while Russia could arm loyalist militias or sabotage pipelines, drawing parallels to their Ukraine playbook. As someone who's seen oil markets swing wildly, I can't shake the worry that this echoes Iraq in 2003. Initial optimism gave way to insurgency, slashing production and spiking prices to $140 a barrel by 2008. Human perception here is key. Venezuelans, divided between Maduro loyalists and opposition, could erupt in protests or strikes, mirroring the 2002–2003 walkouts that halved output and jacked U.S. gas up 30%. Trump's threats against neighbors like Colombia add regional volatility, unsettling investors and baking in risk premiums that keep futures elevated. In my eyes, this isn't just economics. It's a gamble on human resilience where missteps could leave families worldwide paying more for basics. To ground this in reality, let's lean on examples and data that reveal patterns, much like studying past storms to predict the next hurricane. Historically, interventions in oil-rich nations have been double-edged. Libya's 2011 NATO-led ousting of Gaddafi halved production amid civil war, per the International Energy Agency, triggering a 15% global price spike as militias battled over fields. Similarly, Iraq's post-2003 chaos saw output drop 50% initially, fueling that infamous $140 peak and adding $500 annually to U.S. household energy bills. Fast forward to Venezuela. 2025 stats from CEIC data show production at 956,000 barrels in October, down 70% since 2010 due to sanctions and decay, with exports at just $4 billion versus Saudi Arabia's $181 billion. Post-trade WTI futures jumped 5% on uncertainty before easing 0.4%, while Chevron shares climbed 8% on revival bets, but ConocoPhillips still chases $2 billion in seized assets from 2007. China's stake is massive, with 85% of Venezuelan crude heading east under sanctions. A cutoff could force Beijing to source pricier Middle Eastern oil, indirectly hiking U.S. costs. OPEC Plus added 1.5 million barrels in 2025 to stabilize, yet analysts at Colombia's Center on Global Energy Policy warn of serial coups if unrest flares, potentially tightening heavy crude by another 500,000 barrels. From a personal lens, these numbers aren't abstract, they translate to real pain, like the 30% U.S. gas hike after Venezuela's 2002 strike, reminding us how distant conflicts echo at home. Expanding the lens, the implications stretch far beyond pumps, weaving into global economics and everyday lives in ways that feel profoundly interconnected, almost like a web where one tug affects all strands. If stabilization succeeds, U.S. drivers might see gas below $3 a gallon by mid-2026, per Goldman forecasts, spurring consumer spending and cooling inflation. Think cheaper groceries as trucking costs drop, or affordable flights boosting tourism. But a fumbled transition? It could mirror Libya's failed state, where production remains erratic amid militias, or Iran's proxy attacks on Gulf shipping in 2019 that spiked prices 15%. Russia's retaliation might cut European gas flows, echoing 2022 shortages, while China's pivot could strain rare earth supplies vital for EVs, delaying green transitions. For households, higher energy means tougher choices, $500 extra per family yearly, hitting low-income groups hardest and widening inequality. As I mull this over, it strikes me as a human story. Venezuelan migrants fleeing chaos already strain borders, and prolonged unrest could exacerbate that, testing U.S. compassion. Trump's America First, rhetoric prioritizes fossil fuels over climate goals, potentially alienating allies pushing net zero while emboldening rivals to challenge norms. Imagine Russia eyeing Baltic states. In essence, this operation tests whether bold action yields security or sows seeds of broader conflict, leaving me pondering if short-term gains outweigh long-term human costs. Circling back, broader perceptions paint this as a pivotal moment, blending optimism with dread in a narrative that's as much about power as petroleum. From Wall Street's vantage, it's a boon. U.S. firms could unlock 2 to 5 million barrels daily by 2030, depressing long-term prices by $4 per barrel, per J.P. Morgan. But skeptics see colonial echoes, with Trump's oil exec talks pre-raid fueling steal the oil accusations. Human rights groups decry sovereignty violations, while UN condemnations from China and Russia highlight fracturing alliances. As an observer, I sense a shift. This could cement U.S. energy dominance, countering BRICS de-dollarization push, or backfire into quagmire echoing Afghanistan's lessons. Protests in Caracas with armed colectivos clashing amid blackouts underscore the human toll, families divided, futures uncertain. Policy-wise, it's a departure from isolationism, risking deeper entanglements that drain resources from domestic needs. Ultimately, perceptions vary, triumph for some, tragedy for others, but the thread is clear: oil drives decisions, yet people bear consequences. In conclusion, the U.S. strike on Venezuela dangles the promise of cheaper gas through revived supply and weakened foes, yet courts disaster via disruptions and blowback that could inflate costs dramatically. We've traced the context from reserves to raids, analyzed upsides like production surges and downsides like insurgencies, backed by data from Iraq's spikes to Libya's slumps, and explored ripples from household budgets to global rivalries. As prices waver, WTI dipping then steadying, the human element lingers. Lives upended, alliances tested. So as you eye those fluctuating pump numbers, consider this thought-provoking query. Is this intervention a savvy play for affordable energy and security, or a reckless bet that leaves the world and our wallets footing an unpredictable bill? Share your take in the comments. What's your bet on the outcome?